Hi boys and girls, I'd like to read you the first chapter of our new class read. It's called Kensukes Kingdom and it's by Michael Morpurgo. You might have noticed the new year 5 and 6 reading area before we had to close the school, and that's one of the books from that author. I hope you like it. Kensukes Kingdom by Michael Morpurgo. Okay. This is fab. It's got a map, which you'll find out later on. This is a map of Kensukes Kingdom. And we'll start with chapter 1, which is called Peggy Sue. Chapter 1, Peggy Sue. I disappeared on the night before my 12th birthday, July 28th, 1988. Only now can I at last tell the whole extraordinary story, the true story. Kensuke made me promise that I would say nothing at all, until at least 10 years had passed. It was almost the last thing he said to me. I promised, and because of that, I've had to live out a lie. I could let sleeping lies sleep on, but more than 10 years have passed now. I've done school, done college, and had time to think. I owe it to my family and to my friends, all of whom I've deceived for so long, to tell the truth about my long disappearance, about how I lived to come back from the dead. But there is another reason for speaking out now, a far, far better reason. Kensuke was a great man, a good man, and he was my friend. I want the world to know him as I knew him. Until I was nearly 11, until the letter came, life was just normal. There were the 4 of us in the house, my mother, my father, me and Stella. Stella Artois, that is, my 1 ear up and 1 ear down, black and white sheepdog, who always seemed to know what was about to happen before it did. But even she could not have foreseen how that letter was going to change our lives forever. Thinking back, there was a regularity, a sameness about my early childhood. It was down the road each morning to the monkey school. My father called it that because he said the children gibbered and screeched and hung upside down on the climbing frame in the playground. And anyway, I was always monkey-faced to him. When he was in a playful mood, that is, which he often was. The school was really called St. Joseph's, and I was happy there for most of the time anyway. After school every day, whatever the weather, I'd be off down to the recreation ground for football with Eddie Dodds, my best friend in all the world, and Matt and Bobby and the others. It was muddy down there. Cross the ball and it would just land and stick. We had our own team, the Mudlarks we called ourselves. We were good too. Visiting teams seemed to expect the ball to bounce for some reason, and by the time they realised it didn't, we were often 2 or 3 goals up. We weren't so good away from home. Every weekend I did a paper round from Mr. Patel's shop on the corner. I was saving up for a mountain bike. I wanted to go mountain biking up on the moors with Eddie. The trouble was I would keep spending what I'd saved. I'm still the same that way. Sundays were always special. I remember we'd go dinghy sailing, all of us on the reservoir. Stella Artois barking her head off at the other boats as if they'd got no right to be there. My father loved it. He said because the air was clear and clean, no brick dust. He worked down at the brickworks. He was a great do-it-yourself fanatic. There was nothing he couldn't fix, even if it didn't need fixing. So he was in his element on a boat. My mother, who worked part-time in the office at the same brickworks, revelled in it too. I remember her once, throwing back her head in the wind and breathing in deep as she sat at the tiller. "This is it," she cried. "This is how life is supposed to be. Wonderful, just wonderful." She always wore the blue cap. She was the undisputed skipper. If there was a breeze out there, she'd find it and catch it. She had a real nose for it. We had some great days on the water. We'd go out when it was rough, when no one else would, and we'd go skimming over the waves, exhilarating in the speed of it and the sheer joy of it. And if there wasn't a breath of wind, we didn't mind that either. Sometimes we'd be the only boat on the whole reservoir. We'd just sit and fish instead, by the way. I was better at fishing than either of them, and Stella Artois would be curled up behind us in the boat, bored with the whole thing, because there was no one to bark at. Then the letter arrived. Stella Artois savaged it as it came through the letterbox. There were puncture holes in it and it was damp, but we could read enough. The brickworks were going to close down. They were both being made redundant. There was a terrible silence at the breakfast table that morning. After that, we never went sailing on Sundays anymore. I didn't have to ask why not. They both tried to find other jobs, but there was nothing. A creeping misery came over the house. Sometimes I'd come home and they just wouldn't be speaking. They'd argue a lot about little niggly things, and they'd never been like that. My father stopped fixing things around the house. He was scarcely ever home anyway. If he wasn't looking for a job, he'd be down the pub. When he was home, he'd just sit there flicking through endless yachting magazines and saying nothing. I tried to stay out of the house and play football as much as I could, but then Eddie moved away because his father had found a job somewhere down south. Football just wasn't the same without him. The Mudlarks disbanded. Everything was falling apart. Then one Saturday I came home from my paper round and found my mother sitting at the bottom of the stairs crying. She'd always been so strong. I'd never seen her like this. "Silly beggar," she said. "Your dad's a silly beggar, Michael. That's what he is." "What's he done?" I asked her. "He's gone off," she told me, and I thought she meant for good. "He wouldn't hear reason. Oh no, he's had this idea, he says." He wouldn't tell me what it was, only that he sold the car, that we're moving south and he's going to find us a place. I was relieved and quite pleased, really. South must be near to Eddie. She went on, "If he thinks I'm leaving this house, then I'm telling you he's got another thing coming." "Why not?" I said. "Not much here." "Well, there's the house for a start. Then there's Gran, and there's school." "There's other schools," I told her. She became steaming angry then, angrier than I'd ever known her. "You want to know what was the last straw?" she said. "It was you, Michael. You going off on your paper round this morning. You know what your dad said? Well, I'll tell you, shall I? Do you know something?" he says. "There's only one lousy wage coming into this house, Michael's paper money. How do you think that makes me feel, eh? My son's 11 years old. He's got a job and I haven't." Right, we're going to leave it there, boys and girls. We're halfway down page 7 and come back for the rest tomorrow.